Part 1. The transport ship cut through the purple clouds as it descended toward the alien planet. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the window, watching the strange world grow larger below. He had never imagined he would be here, on Valoria Prime, the home planet of the most powerful alien empire in the galaxy. Jake was 28 years old and worked as a medical officer for the human space fleet. He knew a lot about alien biology because he had studied it for years. But studying something in books was very different from actually being on an alien world. His hands were sweating inside his formal uniform gloves. Next to him sat Ambassador Richard Cole, the leader of their delegation. The ambassador was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes. He had been preparing for this mission for months. The relationship between humans and Valorians had been cold for decades. There had been no wars, but there had been no friendship either. Both sides watched each other with suspicion across the stars. This summit was supposed to change everything. If the talks went well, humans and Valorians could become allies. They could trade with each other, share technology, and protect each other from common enemies. If the talks went badly, the cold peace might turn into something worse. The ambassador turned to Jake and spoke quietly. Remember what I told you. The Valorians do not like emotions. They think showing feelings is weak. Stay calm, stay formal, and do not touch anyone. Physical contact is very serious to them. Jake nodded. He had read all the briefing materials. Valorians had beautiful skin that shimmered with light, large eyes that could see in different spectrums, and they were taller than most humans. But the most important thing to know was their culture. They did not touch each other casually like humans did. A handshake would be shocking to them. An embrace would be scandalous. The ship landed on a platform outside the royal palace. When the doors opened, Jake stepped out into air that smelled like flowers and electricity. The sky was a deep purple, and 2 moons hung visible even in daylight. The palace rose before them like a mountain made of crystal and light. Valorian guards escorted them inside. The corridors were enormous, with ceilings so high that Jake felt like an insect. Everything glowed with soft bioluminescent light. Other Valorians they passed would stop and stare at the humans with their large, curious eyes. Finally, they reached the throne room. Jake had to stop himself from gasping. The room was bigger than any building he had ever been inside. Hundreds of Valorian nobles stood along the walls, all wearing elaborate robes. At the far end, sitting on a throne that looked like it was carved from a single giant diamond, was Emperor Thalarin. The emperor was impressive. He was tall even for a Valorian, and his skin shimmered with gold and silver patterns. His eyes were ancient and intelligent. When he spoke, his voice filled the entire chamber. Without any need for speakers or microphones, we welcome the human delegation to Valoria Prime. We hope this meeting will bring understanding between our peoples. Ambassador Cole bowed in the Valorian style and began his prepared speech. Jake tried to pay attention, but something felt wrong. The emperor's words were welcoming, but his face looked sad. The nobles around the room kept whispering to each other and looking worried. Something was happening that the humans did not know about. Then suddenly a door burst open on the side of the throne room. A Valorian official ran in, moving so fast that his robes flew behind him. He dropped to his knees in front of the emperor and started speaking rapidly in the Valorian language. Jake could not understand the words, but he could hear the panic in the official's voice. The emperor's face changed. For just a moment, all his royal composure disappeared, and Jake saw pure fear in his eyes. The entire court began murmuring. Some of the nobles looked shocked. Others looked like they might cry. Emperor Thalarin raised his hand and silence fell immediately. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with emotion. Honored guests, we must ask for your forgiveness. This summit will have to be postponed. Our daughter, Princess Lyrana, is dying. Our best medical technology has failed. All our healers have tried everything they know and nothing has worked. The poison in her body is killing her, and we do not understand how to stop it. The emperor paused, and Jake could see him struggling to maintain control. We ask only for time to be with our daughter in her final hours. We hope you understand. Ambassador Cole stepped forward carefully. Your Majesty, we are deeply sorry to hear this terrible news. If there is anything we can do to help, any assistance we can offer, please let us know. There is nothing, the emperor said, and his voice cracked slightly. We have the most advanced medicine in the galaxy. If we cannot save her, no one can. We thank you for your offer, but we ask you to please retire to your quarters. We will inform you when we are ready to resume discussions. The human delegation was led away in silence. Jake walked in a daze, his mind spinning. A dying princess. Poison that their technology could not cure. The timing seemed impossibly cruel. This summit had taken years to arrange, and now it was falling apart before it had even really begun. The guest quarters they were given were beautiful. The rooms were large and decorated with alien art. The furniture adjusted itself to human proportions, but Jake could not appreciate any of it. He kept thinking about what the Emperor had said. A poison they could not understand. A daughter dying while her parents watched helplessly. He thought about his own training. He knew a lot about alien biology. He had studied Valorian physiology specifically before this mission. Could there be something their doctors had missed? Some interaction between the poison and Valorian biology that they did not understand? Ambassador Cole gathered the delegation for a briefing. "This is a disaster for our mission," he said bluntly. "Even if the princess survives, the Emperor's focus will be on his family, not on peace talks. And if she dies, this summit is finished. The Valorians will need time to mourn, and by the time they are ready to talk again, the political moment will have passed." One of the other diplomats spoke up. "Do we know what kind of poison it is?" "They did not say," Cole replied, "and it would be extremely inappropriate to ask. We must respect their privacy in this difficult time." But Jake could not let it go. That night, while the others tried to rest or worked on contingency plans, he sat in his room and thought. He pulled up everything he had ever learned about Valorian biology on his data pad. He read about their nervous systems, their metabolism, their immune responses. Something the Emperor had said kept echoing in his mind. The poison was beyond their understanding. That was an odd way to phrase it. Not beyond their ability to cure, but beyond their understanding. What kind of poison would be incomprehensible to such an advanced civilization? Jake made a decision. He knew it was against protocol. He knew it might cause a diplomatic incident, but he could not just sit in his room while someone died, not if there was even the smallest chance he could help. He waited until late at night when the palace was quiet. Then he slipped out of his quarters and began searching for the medical wing. Part 2. The palace corridors were dimly lit at night, glowing with a soft blue light that reminded Jake of moonlight on Earth. He moved quietly, trying to look like he belonged there even though his heart was pounding. Most of the guards seemed to be concentrated in other parts of the palace, probably near the princess's room. Jake did not have a map, but he followed his instincts and the faint sound of voices. After several wrong turns, he found himself approaching an ornate archway. Through it, he could see a large private chamber. Medical equipment floated in the air around a raised platform, and on that platform lay Princess Lirana. Even from the doorway, Jake could see how beautiful she was. Her skin had a pearlescent quality that shimmered even in the low light. Her hair was long and silver, floating slightly as if she were underwater, but the beauty was fading. Her skin had turned gray and her breathing was so shallow that Jake could barely see her chest moving. Standing around her were 3 figures. Emperor Thalarin stood on one side, his hand hovering near his daughter's face but not quite touching her. On the other side stood a woman who must be the Empress. She was elegant and regal, but her face was twisted with grief. Between them stood an elderly Valorian in medical robes, checking readings on the floating displays. Jake stepped closer without thinking. He was drawn by the medical mystery and by simple human compassion. He studied the displays, trying to read the Valorian medical symbols. Some of them were universal enough that he could understand them. Neural activity, cardiovascular function, cellular metabolism, all of them were failing. But then he saw something that made him pause. One display showed what looked like a feedback pattern in the princess's neural system. It was cascading through her brain in waves, each wave slightly stronger than the last. Jake had seen something similar once before, in his studies of a rare human neurological disorder. The neural cascade, he whispered to himself. It is not a toxin. It is a feedback loop in the nervous system. He did not realize he had spoken aloud until the elderly physician spun around. The Valorian's eyes went wide with shock and anger. "Who dares enter the sacred space? Guards!" Within seconds, Jake was seized by 2 massive Valorian guards. Their grip was firm but not painful. The Emperor turned and Jake saw fury in those alien eyes. But underneath the fury was something else. Desperation. "The human," Emperor Thalarin said, his voice shaking. "How dare you intrude on our private grief? How dare you violate the sanctity of this moment? I am so sorry, Your Majesty, Jake said quickly. The guards were pulling him backward, but he fought to keep talking. I am a medical officer. I have training in xenobiology. I looked at the readings on the displays and I think I might know what is wrong with the princess. It is not a poison, not a chemical toxin. It is a neurological feedback pattern. If you could just let me examine her, I might be able to help. The royal physician looked outraged. You presume to know more than our medical science? We have technology that is centuries ahead of your primitive human medicine. If we cannot save her, you certainly cannot. Maybe, Jake admitted, but sometimes the simplest approach works when complex technology fails. Please, what do you have to lose? It was perhaps the wrong thing to say, reminding the emperor that his daughter was dying anyway, but the words seemed to strike something in the emperor's heart. He stared at Jake for a long moment, and Jake could see the war happening behind those alien eyes. Pride versus hope, protocol versus desperation. Wait, the emperor said to the guards. They stopped pulling Jake backward. The emperor approached Jake slowly. Tell me exactly what you would do. Jake's mouth was dry, but he forced himself to speak clearly. I need to examine her neural pathways manually. I need to touch her, specifically her temples where the neural access points are located. If I am right about the feedback pattern, my touch might be able to disrupt it. The empress made a sound like a wounded animal. You wish to touch our daughter? Do you understand what you are asking? Physical contact between strangers is forbidden in our culture. It is intimate, sacred. For a human to touch a Valorian princess is unthinkable. I understand, Jake said. I know this violates your customs. But she is dying. If there is even the smallest chance that I can save her, is it not worth trying? The room fell silent except for the quiet beeping of the medical equipment. Everyone was looking at the emperor, waiting for his decision. Jake could see the agony on the ruler's face. He was being asked to violate centuries of cultural taboo, to let an alien touch his dying daughter. Finally, Emperor Thaloran spoke. Do it. The empress started to protest, but the emperor raised his hand. If there is even the smallest hope, I will take it. I will not let pride or custom take my daughter from me if there is any chance to save her. Jake's hands were shaking as he approached the platform. Up close, Princess Lorana was even more striking, though the gray color of approaching death was spreading across her features. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was irregular. He could see the neural patterns pulsing through her skin like slow lightning. I am sorry, Jake whispered to her, though he did not know if she could hear him. I am going to try to help you. He placed his hand gently against her left temple. Her skin was cool and smooth, nothing like human skin. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake closed his eyes and focused, trying to sense the neural pathways he had read about in his studies. Then everything changed. A massive surge of energy passed between them. It felt like touching a live electrical wire, except the electricity was made of thoughts and emotions and memories. Jake gasped and his whole body went rigid. The princess's eyes flew open, glowing with an intense silver light that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Her back arched off the platform, and every piece of medical equipment in the room started shrieking alarms. The displays showed readings spiking wildly, numbers climbing to levels that should have been impossible. What is happening? The empress screamed. What have you done? Jake wanted to answer, but he could not speak. He could not move. His hand seemed fused to the princess's temple. Energy was flowing between them in both directions, and with that energy came something else. Information, sensation, memory. Jake saw images that were not his own. He saw Lorana as a child, learning to read and fight and rule. He saw her training to become a diplomat, studying human culture in preparation for the peace talks. He saw the ambush, soldiers in unmarked armor attacking her transport. He saw the moment the poison entered her system, watched it spread through her body like dark fire. But more than just seeing, Jake felt it. He experienced her confusion as her body began to fail. He felt her terror as she realized she was dying. He felt her sadness at leaving her parents, at never seeing the peace between their peoples that she had worked so hard for. And then somehow Jake understood the poison itself. It was not a chemical. It was designed to feed on Valorian neural patterns, creating a loop that grew stronger with each cycle until it overwhelmed the brain completely. But Jake's neural patterns were different. Human brains worked differently than Valorian brains. His neural signature was disrupting the pattern, breaking the loop. The energy surge reached a peak so intense that Jake thought he might die from it. Then suddenly it released. The force threw Jake backward and he stumbled, gasping for air. He would have fallen if the guards had not caught him. Princess Lyrana collapsed back onto the platform. For a terrible moment, Jake thought he had killed her. Then he saw color returning to her skin, spreading from her temples outward like dawn breaking. Her breathing steadied and deepened. The medical displays began showing normal readings, or at least closer to normal. The room erupted into chaos. The royal physician rushed forward, checking the princess with both equipment and his hands. The empress was crying, making sounds in the Valorian language that Jake could not understand but that clearly expressed overwhelming emotion. The emperor stood frozen, as if afraid that moving would somehow break the spell. "She is stabilizing," the physician announced, his voice filled with wonder and disbelief. "The neural cascade is reversing. Her brain activity is returning to normal. I do not understand how this is possible, but she is recovering." Jake leaned against the wall, exhausted. His head was pounding and he felt like he had just run a marathon. But he could not take his eyes off Princess Lyrana. She was breathing normally now and the healthy shimmer was returning to her skin. Then her eyes opened. They were no longer glowing but were their natural color, a deep violet that reminded Jake of Earth's oceans. She looked around the room with confusion. Then her gaze found Jake. When their eyes met, he felt an echo of that connection they had just shared. Recognition passed between them. The princess's voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but everyone in the room heard her clearly. "You," she said, looking at Jake, "you saved me." Part 3. The news of Princess Lyrana's miraculous recovery spread through the Valorian Empire faster than light. Within hours, every citizen of the empire knew that a human had saved their beloved princess. The palace, which had been silent with grief just the day before, was now filled with celebration and wonder. Jake woke up in quarters that were far nicer than the guest room he had been given before. He was now in the royal wing of the palace, in a suite that was probably larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. When he asked why he had been moved, the servants told him it was by order of the emperor. Apparently, saving the princess's life came with certain privileges. Ambassador Cole arrived shortly after breakfast, and he looked like a man who could not believe his luck. The ambassador was practically bouncing with excitement as he paced Jake's new room. "Do you understand what you have done?" Cole asked, grinning widely. "You have accomplished more for human-Valorian relations in one night than decades of careful diplomacy could have achieved. The Emperor is calling you a hero. The common people are celebrating you in the streets. We have gone from uncertain peace talks to a potential alliance overnight." "I just did what any doctor would do," Jake said quietly. "She was dying and I had an idea that might save her. I did not think about the politics." "Well, thank goodness you did not think about politics or you might have talked yourself out of it," Cole said. "The Emperor wants to see you this afternoon. He is going to offer you a reward, some kind of formal recognition. This is huge, Jake." Jake felt uncomfortable with all the attention. He was not a hero. He was just a medical officer who had gotten lucky, but he could not deny that he was curious to see Princess Lyrana again. Ever since that moment when their minds had touched, he had felt something. A connection, like a thread pulled tight between them. The summons came after lunch. Jake was escorted to a private audience chamber where the royal family waited. Emperor Thalarin stood near a window that looked out over the capital city. Empress Vara sat in a chair that was less formal than a throne, but still clearly royal. And Princess Lyrana was there too, sitting up and looking far healthier than she had any right to look after being nearly dead the previous night. When Jake entered, all three of them turned to look at him. The Emperor's expression was formal but not cold. The Empress looked at him with something that might have been gratitude, or might have been something more complicated. And Lyrana smiled, a small private smile that made Jake's heart beat faster. "Jake Morrison," the Emperor said formally, "you have done our family a service that we can never truly repay. By our laws and traditions, we owe you a life debt. You may name any reward within our power to grant, and it shall be yours." Jake shifted uncomfortably. He had not saved Lyrana's life for a reward. "Your Majesty, I was just doing my job." "I do not need any reward." "Nevertheless, you will have one," the Emperor insisted. His tone made it clear that refusing was not really an option. "Name what you desire," Jake thought carefully. He could ask for wealth, for technology, for almost anything, but what he really wanted was understanding. I would like permission to study what happened last night. From a medical perspective, if we can understand how my touch disrupted the poison's effects, it might help protect others in the future. Both Valorians and humans. The Emperor's expression softened slightly. A modest request and a wise one. Permission granted. You may work with our royal physicians to conduct your research. He may also visit me, Princess Lyrana added. Her voice was stronger now, but still had a musical quality that human voices lacked. I believe I owe him my personal gratitude, not just the formal gratitude of the court. The Empress looked shocked. Lyrana, it is not appropriate for— Mother, the princess interrupted gently. This human touched me and saved my life. Whatever boundaries of propriety existed before have already been crossed. I would like to speak with him, to understand what happened between us. The Empress looked like she wanted to argue more, but the Emperor raised his hand. Lyrana's right. The normal rules do not apply here. Jake Morrison, you are granted access to the princess's recovery chambers, but remember that she is still healing. Do not tire her. Over the next few days, Jake settled into a strange new routine. His mornings were spent in the royal medical facilities, working with Valorian physicians who were initially skeptical, but became increasingly fascinated by his findings. The research was incredible. Jake's human neural patterns had indeed disrupted the poison's feedback loop, essentially providing a reset button for Lyrana's nervous system. The poison had been designed specifically for Valorian biology and had not known how to handle contact with a completely different neural architecture. But it was his afternoons with Princess Lyrana that Jake found himself thinking about most. Despite the vast differences in their cultures and biology, they discovered an easy friendship. Lyrana was brilliant, curious about everything, and possessed a sense of humor that caught Jake off guard. They would walk together in the palace gardens, a massive complex of hanging plants and floating water features that defied Earth's understanding of physics. Valorian guards followed at a discreet distance, but they were given enough space to talk privately. Your people are very strange, Lyrana said one afternoon. They were standing near a fountain that flowed upward instead of down. You touch each other constantly. Handshakes, hugs, pats on the back. I watched recordings of human gatherings. Everyone is always touching everyone. Does it not feel overwhelming? We find it comforting, Jake explained. Physical touch is how we express connection, support, affection. When someone is sad, we hug them. When someone does well, we pat them on the back. The idea of not being able to touch someone casually seems lonely to us. It is lonely, Lyrana admitted quietly. She looked at the fountain, not at Jake. Especially for the royal family, we are only touched by immediate family members, and even then, rarely. Physical contact is reserved for moments of great significance. When you touched me that night. She paused, searching for words. I felt your mind, your emotions, your memories. It was the most intense experience of my life. Jake felt heat rise to his face. I felt yours too. I saw your childhood, your training. I felt what you felt. It was incredible and terrifying at the same time. They walked in silence for a moment. Jake could feel the weight of what neither of them was saying. The connection between them was growing stronger every day. But it was complicated by so many things. Politics, culture, biology. They came from different worlds in every sense of the phrase. Tell me about the ambush, Jake said finally. If you are comfortable talking about it. I saw flashes of it when our minds connected, but I did not understand the full context. Lyrana's expression darkened. She was quiet for so long that Jake thought she might not answer. Then she started speaking, her voice low. There are factions within the Empire who do not want peace with humanity. They believe humans are too unpredictable, too aggressive, too different. They think an alliance would weaken us rather than strengthen us. And they decided to stop the peace talks by killing you? Jake asked, horrified. Not just killing me. The poison was specifically designed to kill me slowly. It was supposed to look like a natural illness at first. That way, suspicion would not immediately fall on any particular group. But as I got worse, people would start to wonder. And when I died during the human delegation's visit, there would be questions. Did the humans poison me? Did they bring some disease? Fear and suspicion would have destroyed any chance of peace. Jake felt sick. Someone close to your father did this. Someone with access to you. Yes, Lyrana confirmed. My father suspects General Korvax, one of his military commanders. Korvax has always opposed cooperation with other species, but we have no proof. The soldiers who ambushed me wore no identifying marks. The poison left no trace of its origin. And now I have ruined their plan by saving you, Jake said. Which means they might try again. They might, Lorana agreed. But now you are here. Now our peoples have a symbol of hope and cooperation. That makes their mission much harder. She turned to look at Jake directly. You have given me back my life, Jake Morrison. But more than that, you have given both our peoples a chance at something better. A chance at understanding. Jake met her gaze, and again he felt that pull between them. That connection that had formed when he touched her temple and their minds had merged. It was like a bridge between their souls, and every moment they spent together made it stronger. Lyrana, Jake began, then hesitated. He was not sure how to put his feelings into words. That connection we shared. Do you still feel it? Every moment of every day, she admitted softly. It is like a thread between us. I can sense your emotions sometimes. When you are happy, I feel warmth. When you are worried, I feel tension. I have never heard of anything like it in our history. Two minds that touch so deeply, from such different species. Among humans, we would call it a bond, Jake said carefully. Something precious and rare. Among my people, we would call it impossible, Lyrana countered. But she was smiling slightly. A princess and a human. A Valorian and an alien. My father might accept you as a hero, as a friend to the Empire. Ambassador Cole might see you as a useful diplomatic tool. But anything? Part 4. The diplomatic summit resumed 3 days after Princess Lyrana's recovery. The atmosphere had changed completely. Where before there had been cold formality and suspicion, now there was cautious optimism. The Valorian nobles who had seemed hostile before were now curious about the humans. Some even seemed friendly. But not everyone was happy about the change. Jake noticed it during the formal reception that opened the renewed talks. He was standing with Ambassador Cole, trying to look diplomatic while feeling completely out of his depth. That was when he first felt the hostile stare. General Korvac stood across the great hall surrounded by other military officers. He was tall even for a Valorian, with skin that had dark patterns like war paint. His eyes were fixed on Jake with an expression that was not quite hate, but was definitely not friendly. Jake tried to ignore it and focus on the conversations around him. But the general approached, moving through the crowd with purpose. The other Valorians seemed to part for him automatically, like they recognized a predator in their midst. Jake Morrison, Korvac said, his voice smooth but cold. The human who saved our princess. You are the talk of the Empire. I just did what anyone would have done, Jake replied, trying to sound casual even though his heart was racing. Did you? Korvac's large eyes studied Jake like he was looking at an insect. Tell me, do you truly believe your people and mine can coexist peacefully? Or is this all just theater? A pretty show before the real intentions reveal themselves. Jake felt anger rise in his chest. I believe we have more in common than many people realize. Both our species value family, loyalty, honor. Those are good foundations for peace. Honor, Korvac repeated as if tasting the word. An interesting concept. Yet I wonder, when your people look at our empire, what do you really see? Do you see equals? Or do you see resources to exploit, territory to claim, technology to steal? Before Jake could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. General Korvac, I'm sure you have more important duties than interrogating our honored guest. Princess Lyrana had appeared at Jake's side. She looked stunning in formal robes that shimmered with light, but her expression was cold, and her tone made it clear that her words were not a suggestion. Korvac's eyes narrowed. Of course, Your Highness. I was merely expressing my concern for your well-being. After all, we still do not fully understand how this human's touch affected you. There could be long-term consequences that we have not discovered yet. The only consequence is that I am alive, Lyrana said sharply, which seems to disappoint certain parties. The accusation hung in the air between them. Several nearby Valorians stopped their conversations to listen. Korvac's expression did not change, but Jake saw his hands clench into fists. I would never wish harm upon the royal family, Korvac said, his voice carefully controlled. I merely advocate for caution when dealing with unknown alien influences. Your caution is noted, Lyrana replied. And dismissed. You may return to your duties, General. It was a clear dismissal. Korvac bowed stiffly and walked away, but not before giving Jake one last look that promised this conversation was not over. He hates me, Jake said quietly once the general was gone. He hates what you represent. Lyrana corrected. You are proof that humans and Valorians can help each other, can connect with each other. That threatens everything he believes about keeping our species separate. She paused. My father suspects Korvax was involved in my poisoning, but we have no proof. Be careful around him, Jake. He is dangerous. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about Korvax's barely concealed hostility, about the faction that wanted the peace talks to fail. He was pacing his room when he heard a soft sound at his door. When he opened it, Princess Lyrana stood in the corridor. She was wearing simpler robes than she had at the reception, and she looked worried. I should not be here, she said immediately. If anyone sees me visiting your quarters at night, it will cause a scandal. But I needed to warn you. My intelligence sources have informed me that Korvax is planning something, an incident designed to embarrass the human delegation and undermine the summit. What kind of incident? Jake asked, stepping aside to let her in. Having her in his private room probably violated a dozen Valorian protocols, but right now, he was more worried about her safety than propriety. I do not know the details yet, Lyrana admitted, but it will happen soon, probably during one of the formal negotiation sessions, something that will make your delegation look untrustworthy or dangerous. Jake felt cold fear settle in his stomach. We need to tell Ambassador Cole, we need to tell your father. And tell them what? Lyrana asked. That I have suspicions but no proof. Korvax is careful. He has covered his tracks well. All we can do is be watchful and ready to respond. They stood in silence for a moment. Jake was very aware that they were alone together, that this was probably the most private conversation they had ever had. The connection between them seemed stronger in the quiet darkness, that thread that linked their minds pulling tight. Lyrana, Jake said softly, that connection we share. Can you feel me right now? My emotions? Yes, she whispered. I feel your fear for me, your determination to protect me. She paused, and even in the dim light, Jake could see color rising in her skin, the Valorian equivalent of a blush. Your affection, is that wrong? Jake asked. Given everything that separates us? I do not know, Lyrana admitted. She reached out as if to touch his hand, then stopped herself just before making contact. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility and prohibition. Among my people, when two minds touch as deeply as ours did, it creates a bond that is considered sacred. It transcends normal boundaries. But a princess and a human? It has never happened before. There is no precedent, no protocol. Maybe that makes it special, Jake suggested. Maybe that means we get to write our own rules. Lyrana smiled, but it was sad. You are an optimist. I admire that about humans, but I am a realist. Even if we wanted to pursue this connection, the political complications would be enormous. My father is progressive, but there are limits to what even he would accept. And your people? Would they want their representative bonded to an alien princess? I think my people would want me to be happy, Jake said. And you make me happy. Before Lyrana could respond, they both heard footsteps in the corridor outside. She moved quickly toward the door, her diplomatic training kicking in. I must go. Remember what I said. Be careful. Korvax will strike soon. She slipped out of the room like a shadow, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and the lingering sense of her presence. The disaster struck 2 days later, during a crucial negotiation session. The human and Valorian delegations were discussing trade agreements when alarms suddenly began blaring throughout the palace. Valorian security forces rushed into the chamber, their faces grim. Your Majesty, one of the security officers addressed the Emperor, we have detected an intrusion into our defense networks. The source has been traced to the human delegation's communication systems aboard their ship. Ambassador Cole's face went pale. That is impossible. We have made no such attempts. We would never compromise our mission with espionage. But the Valorian security chief was already displaying evidence on the large screens around the chamber, logs showing intrusion attempts, data packets sent from human systems, timestamps that proved the activity had been happening throughout the summit. The Valorian High Council erupted in angry voices. Some were calling for the humans to be expelled. Others were demanding answers. Emperor Thalarin looked grave, disappointed, and angry all at once. These are serious charges, the Emperor said, his voice cutting through the chaos. If true, they constitute espionage and a betrayal of our hospitality. Jake's mind was racing. This was it. This was Korvax's play. A sophisticated frame job designed to destroy the peace talks. But how could they prove it? Your Majesty, Jake spoke up, his voice somehow steady even though he felt terrified. Request permission to investigate these charges personally. The room fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Jake. Korvac, standing with the military contingent, smiled slightly. It was the smile of a predator who thought he had already won. You? Korvac said smoothly. A medical officer? What could you possibly contribute to a technical investigation? I have training in computer systems, Jake said, which was stretching the truth. He had taken some classes in college, but he was far from an expert. And I have a unique perspective. I am not invested in the politics of this situation. I just want the truth. Emperor Thalarin studied Jake for a long moment. Jake could see the Emperor weighing his options, trying to decide if he could trust a human to investigate charges against humans. Finally, he spoke, an interesting proposal. Very well, Jake Morrison. You will have 24 hours to present your findings. If you cannot prove these accusations false, the summit will end and the human delegation will be asked to leave Valorian space. Is that understood? Yes, Your Majesty, Jake said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As the session broke up in confusion and anger, Jake caught Lorana's eye across the room. She gave him a small nod, a gesture of support and faith. He would need both. Part 5. Jake worked through the night in a secure technical facility deep within the palace. He was not alone. Princess Lorana had insisted on helping him, and she had brought 2 Valorian technicians who were willing to give the investigation a fair chance. The Emperor had granted them access to all the relevant systems, though Jake suspected there were probably security officers watching their every move. The evidence against the human delegation looked convincing at first. The logs showed clear intrusion attempts into Valorian defense networks, and they all traced back to human communication systems. But Jake had learned something important during his years of study. When something looks too perfect, it probably is not real. Here, Jake pointed at a section of code on the holographic display floating in front of them. Look at this intrusion protocol. It is supposed to be human technology, but the underlying algorithmic structure is Valorian. Whoever created this fake evidence used Valorian code and tried to make it look like human code. They did a good job, but they made mistakes. Lorana leaned over his shoulder to study the code. Her proximity made it hard for Jake to concentrate, but he forced himself to focus. Can you trace it back to the source? She asked. Maybe, Jake said. If we can find where the false logs were inserted into the system, we might be able to identify who had access. They worked together for hours, following the digital trail deeper into the palace's network. Jake found himself amazed at how well he and Lorana worked as a team. She would see patterns in the Valorian systems that he missed, and he would spot anomalies that her cultural assumptions made her overlook. That connection between them, the bond formed when he had saved her life, seemed to make their collaboration almost intuitive. As the palace's artificial sun began to rise outside the windows, they found what they were looking for. The intrusion attempts had not come from the human ship at all. They had originated from within the Valorian military network itself, specifically from terminals that were assigned to General Korvac's personal staff. He framed us, Jake said, feeling both relief and anger. He created fake logs to make it look like we were spying. But he will claim his systems were compromised, Lorana warned. He will say that humans hacked his network to create this false trail. Jake had thought of that. He pulled up another layer of data, his fingers moving quickly across the holographic interface. Look at the timestamps. The first intrusion attempt was logged 6 days ago. That was before your recovery, before there was any real momentum for peace. This was all planned in advance. Korvac intended for you to die and for suspicion to fall on the humans. When I saved you, he had to switch to Plan B. One of the Valorian technicians, a young male named Torin, spoke up hesitantly. There is more. If we cross-reference these timestamps with security footage and communication logs, we can prove that the general's staff were the only ones with access at these specific times. And look here. He highlighted another section of data. This code fragment matches a known signature from military intelligence operations. This was not hackers or amateurs. This was a professional operation. They compiled everything into a comprehensive report. The evidence was circumstantial in some places, but taken together, it painted a clear picture. General Korvac had orchestrated both the princess's poisoning and the false espionage charges. He had tried to sabotage the peace summit through any means necessary. Jake presented his findings to Emperor Thaloran in a private session. The Emperor listened in silence, his expression unreadable. Princess Lyrana stood beside Jake, lending her support and her own testimony. Ambassador Cole was there too, looking nervous but hopeful. When Jake finished, the Emperor studied the evidence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up. "This is damning evidence against General Korvax. It suggests he is guilty not only of the false accusations but also of orchestrating my daughter's poisoning." His voice was cold with controlled fury. "He tried to kill my child. He tried to start a conflict with humanity, all to preserve his own narrow view of how the Empire should be run. Father, we must act quickly," Lyrana urged. "If Korvax realizes we have discovered his plot, he might flee or destroy evidence." The Emperor's decision was swift and decisive. Within an hour, General Korvax was arrested along with several of his senior staff members. A full investigation was launched, and as the hours passed, more evidence came to light. Messages between conspirators, financial records showing payments to the assassins who had poisoned Lyrana, a whole network of military and political figures who had worked to sabotage any chance of human-Valorian cooperation. The summit reconvened 2 days later, with a completely different atmosphere. The conspirators had been exposed. The Valorians who had been suspicious of humans now understood that the real threat had come from within their own empire. Ambassador Cole negotiated with skill and care, and by the end of the week, a preliminary treaty had been signed. The Treaty of Shared Horizons, as it was called, laid the groundwork for everything that was to come. Trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, joint scientific research, mutual defense pacts. It was the beginning of a new era for both species. But for Jake, the most important moment came in the palace gardens on the last evening before the human delegation was scheduled to leave. He stood with Princess Lyrana beside the upward-flowing fountain, watching the twin moons rise over the alien city. "You will be leaving tomorrow," Lyrana said. It was not a question. "Actually, no," Jake replied. A smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I have requested a transfer. There is going to be a permanent human embassy here now, and they need medical officers who understand Valorian biology. My application was approved this morning." Lyrana's face lit up with joy, her skin shimmering with bioluminescence. "You are staying?" "Here on Valoria Prime. If that is okay with you," Jake said. "I know things are complicated between us. The politics, the cultural differences, the fact that you are a princess and I am just a medical officer from Earth. But I also know that what we have is rare. That connection we share, it is not going away. I felt you die and helped bring you back. That has to mean something." "It means everything," Lyrana whispered. She reached out, and this time she did not stop herself. Her hand found his, and the moment their skin touched, that surge of connection flowed between them. It was gentler than the first time, but no less profound. Warmth, affection, hope, and something deeper that neither of them was quite ready to name. "Among my people," Lyrana said softly, "when two minds touch as deeply as ours have, it creates a bond that is considered more sacred than marriage, more permanent than any law. It is rare, happening perhaps once in a generation, and it has never happened between two different species before. So we are making history," Jake said, gently squeezing her hand. "We are," Lyrana agreed. "My father has already discussed it with his advisors. They are calling you a special liaison to the royal family. You will have diplomatic status, which means you can stay close to me without causing too much scandal. It will not be easy. There will be people who disapprove, people who think a human has no business being close to the princess. But my father supports us. He sees our connection as a symbol of the alliance between our peoples." Jake felt a weight lift from his chest. "And what do you see it as?" Lyrana smiled, and in that smile Jake saw their future. Complicated, uncertain, full of challenges they would have to face together. But also full of possibility, wonder, and something that might, given time, become love. "I see it as the beginning of something extraordinary," she said. "A bridge between worlds. A connection that proves our peoples are not so different after all." They stood together as the stars emerged in the darkening sky. Above them, the palace glowed with bioluminescent light, celebrating the treaty that would change the course of history. Around them, the gardens filled with alien flowers that released their perfume into the night air. And between them, that invisible thread of connection pulled tight, binding a human and a Valorian together in a way that no one had thought possible. The signing ceremony for the Treaty of Shared Horizons took place the next day in the Great Throne Room. Hundreds of Valorians and the human delegation gathered to witness the historic moment. Emperor Thalarin signed the treaty with formal dignity. Ambassador Cole signed with barely contained joy. And when it was done, when the treaty was official, the entire room erupted in celebration. Jake stood next to Princess Lyrana, and in full view of both their peoples, she took his hand. It was a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. A Valorian princess, voluntarily touching a human, showing the world their connection without shame or hesitation. The crowd fell silent for a moment, shocked by the public display. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was applauding, celebrating not just the treaty but the symbol of hope that Jake and Lyrana represented. In the years that followed, Jake's story would be told across the galaxy. The human medical officer who had accidentally touched a dying alien princess and changed everything. Some versions of the story would exaggerate his heroism. Others would focus on the political intrigue. But the truth was simpler and more profound than any embellished tale. Jake had seen someone in need and had tried to help.